Why do we do things we know are bad for us and struggle to do the things we know would change our lives? Most of our daily actions happen without conscious thought. We wake up, check our phone, brush our teeth, eat the same foods, react the same way to stress, and repeat the same patterns day after day. And before we go any further, if you want to understand your mind and reshape your life one idea at a time, subscribe to the book Day and become better than yesterday. This book, The Power of Habit, is written by Charles Duhigg. Unlike many self-improvement books, this one is grounded in neuroscience and real-world research. It doesn't tell you to try harder. It explains how habits actually work inside the brain and how change becomes possible when you understand the system behind behavior. Duhigg opens the book with a surprising truth. Habits are not choices, at least not in the moment. They are automatic patterns the brain uses to save energy. When a behavior becomes habitual, the brain stops fully participating. It hands control over to a mental shortcut. This is not a flaw, it's a survival feature. If your brain had to think deeply about every small decision, you would be exhausted by noon. So it builds habits. Once a pattern is learned, the brain goes quiet and lets the behavior run on autopilot. The problem is that the brain doesn't judge habits as good or bad. It only judges whether they are efficient. This is why harmful habits can feel so powerful. They are deeply wired, and this is also why willpower alone rarely works. You are not fighting laziness, you are fighting automation. Duhigg explains that every habit follows a simple structure called the habit loop. It has three parts: a cue, a routine, and a reward. The cue is the trigger. It tells your brain to go into automatic mode. The routine is the behavior itself. The reward is what your brain gets out of it. Once the brain associates a cue with a reward, it craves the routine. Over time, this loop becomes stronger and faster, running without conscious approval. This explains why stress makes people overeat, why boredom leads to scrolling, and why certain emotions trigger predictable reactions. The behavior is not random, it is learned. Duhigg also introduces an important idea early on: habits never truly disappear. They can be ignored, replaced, or overridden, but the neural pathways remain. This is why old habits resurface under pressure. When the brain is tired or stressed, it falls back on familiar loops. This is not failure, it is biology. The power of this book lies in its promise. If habits follow a structure, then they can be changed by working with that structure instead of against it. Change does not begin with motivation, it begins with awareness. When you understand your habit loops, you stop blaming yourself and start redesigning your behavior. To change a habit, Charles Duhigg says you must first understand it precisely, not emotionally, not morally, structurally. This is where the habit loop becomes the most important concept in the book. Every habit, no matter how complex it feels, follows the same three-step pattern: cue, routine, reward. If you can identify these three elements, you can begin to change behavior without fighting yourself. The cue is the trigger that tells your brain to go into automatic mode. It can be a time of day, a place, an emotional state, other people, or an action that happens right before the habit starts. Many people think they have weak willpower, but in reality, they are surrounded by powerful cues they don't notice. For example, stress after work may cue snacking. Boredom may cue scrolling. Feeling criticized may cue anger or withdrawal. The brain learns to associate these cues with a certain reward. Next comes the routine, which is the behavior itself. This is the habit you see: eating, checking your phone, smoking, procrastinating, reacting emotionally. This is the part people try to eliminate directly, and this is why they often fail. Because the routine is not the real reason the habit exists. The final part of the loop is the reward. This is what the brain actually wants: relief, pleasure, distraction, comfort, validation, energy. The reward teaches the brain whether the loop is worth remembering. Over time, the brain begins to anticipate the reward the moment the cue appears. This anticipation creates craving, and craving is what drives habits, not discipline. Duhigg explains that if you want to change a habit, you must keep the cue and the reward, but change the routine. This is the golden rule of habit change. Trying to erase a habit completely leaves a vacuum. The brain doesn't like vacuums, it wants its reward, so it pulls you back into the old behavior, especially under stress. But if you swap the routine while keeping the same reward, change becomes realistic. For example, if stress cues you to eat junk food for comfort, the real reward might be relaxation, not food. If you replace eating with a short walk, deep breathing, or music, the brain can still get the reward it wants through a healthier routine. This process requires experimentation. You test different routines and observe whether the craving fades. When the reward matches the craving, the habit loop can be rewritten. Another critical point Duhigg makes is that awareness breaks automation. The moment you pause and name the cue, the routine, and the reward, the habit loses some of its power. You are no longer blindly acting, you are observing. This is why habits feel strongest when we are tired, stressed, or distracted. Awareness drops, and the brain defaults to familiar loops. Changing habits is not about becoming a different person overnight. It's about becoming more conscious in key moments. Once you see your loops clearly, behavior stops feeling mysterious. You stop asking, "What's wrong with me?" and start asking, "What is this habit trying to give me?" That question alone changes everything. As the power of habit goes deeper, Charles Duhigg introduces a concept that explains why some changes transform an entire life, while others barely make a difference. He calls these keystone habits. Keystone habits are small habits that once changed, trigger a chain reaction. They don't just improve one area, they quietly reshape identity, discipline, and decision-making across many areas at once. Duhigg discovered that successful people, organizations, and even societies rarely change everything at the same time. They change one habit that makes other habits easier. For some people, that habit is regular exercise, not because exercise alone makes you successful, but because it changes how you think. People who exercise consistently tend to eat better, sleep better, manage stress better, and feel more control over their lives. One habit shifts many behaviors. For others, it's journaling, daily planning, prayer, reading, or a consistent sleep routine. The power lies not in the habit itself, but in the belief it builds. Keystone habits send a message to the brain: I am someone who keeps promises to myself. That belief changes behavior automatically. Duhigg explains that keystone habits work because they reshape identity. When identity shifts, choices follow naturally. You don't force discipline, you act in alignment with who you believe you are. Another powerful example in the book comes from organizations. Companies that focused on one keystone habit, like workplace safety, unexpectedly saw improvements in productivity, morale, and profit. Why? Because changing one core behavior changed how people communicated, took responsibility, and paid attention. This reveals an important truth: willpower grows when systems support it. Duhigg also explains that willpower itself is a habit. It can be trained, depleted, and strengthened. People with strong self-control are not born that way. They practice it in small, consistent ways until it becomes automatic. This is why trying to change everything at once almost always fails. Too much change overwhelms the brain. It drains willpower and triggers relapse. Keystone habits reduce cognitive load. They simplify decision-making. Instead of asking, "How do I fix my whole life?" the better question becomes, "What is one habit that would make everything else easier?" This aligns perfectly with how the brain works. The brain loves efficiency. Give it one strong loop to build around, and it will reorganize behavior around that loop. Duhigg also highlights the importance of tracking. When people track a keystone habit, even loosely, awareness increases. Awareness strengthens commitment. Commitment reinforces identity. Small wins matter. They create momentum. Momentum builds confidence. Confidence makes change feel possible. The mistake most people make is underestimating small changes. They want dramatic transformation, but the brain changes incrementally. Big results are built from small, repeated actions. Keystone habits don't require perfection, they require consistency. Missing once doesn't break the habit, giving up does. When you identify and protect one keystone habit, you stop fighting your life on multiple fronts. You create leverage. As the power of habit continues, Charles Duhigg turns to a concept many people misunderstand: willpower. Most of us think willpower is a personality trait. You either have it or you don't. Duhigg shows that this belief is wrong. Willpower is a skill, and like any skill, it can be trained, strengthened, and protected. Research Duhigg presents reveals something surprising. Willpower behaves like a muscle. Use it too much and it gets tired. Rest it and it recovers. This explains why people make good decisions in the morning and poor ones late at night. It's not weakness, it's depletion. This is also why relying on constant self-control rarely works. When life gets stressful, willpower drains faster. And when willpower is low, the brain falls back on habits. Not good or bad habits, familiar ones. This is where habits become powerful allies. When a behavior becomes habitual, it requires less willpower. The brain runs it automatically. This is why building the right habits protects you during difficult moments. You don't need motivation when the system is already in place. Duhigg explains that successful habit change often happens when people plan for failure in advance. Instead of assuming they'll always feel strong, they assume they'll feel weak sometimes, and they design routines to handle those moments. For example, someone trying to eat healthier doesn't rely on willpower when hungry. They prepare meals in advance. Someone trying to avoid distractions blocks websites or silences notifications. They remove temptation instead of fighting it. This approach shifts the question from "how do I become stronger?" to "how do I make the right choice easier?" Another key insight here is belief. Duhigg found that people who successfully change habits often share one thing: they believe change is possible. This belief doesn't have to be perfect, it just has to exist. Belief grows through evidence. Small wins prove to the brain that effort leads to results. This is why support systems matter. Groups, communities, or even one supportive person reinforce belief during moments of doubt. Duhigg gives examples of people who changed destructive habits only after joining groups where belief was shared. Not because the group forced change, but because it created emotional reinforcement. When belief enters the habit loop, change becomes sustainable. Willpower also improves when people attach habits to meaning. A routine connected to purpose lasts longer than one connected only to pleasure or fear. When behavior aligns with identity and values, resistance weakens. The deeper lesson here is that discipline is not about punishment, it's about structure. You don't need to fight yourself every day. You need systems that work with how your brain actually functions. Understanding willpower removes shame. You stop blaming yourself for feeling tired or slipping occasionally. Instead, you redesign your habits to support you when energy is low. As the power of habit expands beyond individuals, Charles Duhigg reveals something both fascinating and unsettling. Habits don't just shape people, they shape organizations and entire societies. Companies, governments, and institutions understand habit science very well. They study cues, routines, and rewards to influence behavior at scale, not always with bad intentions, but often without your awareness. Duhigg explains how businesses design products and environments to fit seamlessly into existing habit loops. A cue triggers a routine, a reward follows, and over time, the behavior feels natural, effortless, even inevitable. Think about how often you check certain apps, buy familiar brands, or follow routines without consciously choosing them. These patterns didn't appear by accident. They were designed to be easy to repeat. One of the most important ideas here is choice architecture. When options are presented in certain ways, people tend to choose predictably. The brain prefers what is familiar, convenient, and emotionally rewarding. Organizations that understand this can guide behavior without force. This does not mean people are powerless, but it does mean awareness is essential. Duhigg emphasizes that responsibility is shared. Organizations can influence habits, but individuals still make choices. The danger appears when people act automatically without realizing how much their behavior is being shaped. This is why understanding habit loops is protective. When you recognize cues and rewards in the environment, manipulation loses power. Awareness restores agency. Duhigg also explores how habits drive group behavior. In teams, families, and communities, shared routines create culture. Culture is simply a collection of habits repeated by many people. When those habits change, culture changes. This explains why small shifts in organizational behavior can lead to massive transformation. Change one keystone habit, like how meetings are run or how feedback is given, and the entire dynamic can shift. The same principle applies to society. Social movements often succeed not by changing minds overnight, but by changing daily behaviors. Small, repeated actions compound into large-scale change. But there is a warning here. When people believe they are not responsible for their habits, they give up control. When they believe habits are destiny, they stop questioning behavior. Duhigg makes it clear that habits influence behavior, but they do not eliminate choice. You are not guilty for having habits, but you are responsible for becoming aware of them. This section of the book encourages a balanced view. Habit science is powerful. It can be used to help people grow or to exploit their attention. The difference lies in awareness and intention. When you understand how habits are built, you stop being surprised by your own behavior and the behavior of others. You stop moralizing and start analyzing. And analysis creates freedom. As the power of habit reaches its conclusion, Charles Duhigg leaves us with a powerful and practical truth. Change is possible, but it is never accidental. Habits are not destiny, they are systems, and systems can be redesigned. This book does not promise effortless transformation. It offers something better: understanding. When you understand how habits work, you stop fighting yourself and start working with your brain. Every habit follows a loop. Every loop has a trigger. Every trigger can be interrupted. Awareness is the first step. Without it, behavior feels mysterious and uncontrollable. With it, choice returns. Duhigg emphasizes that real change happens when belief enters the process. People can modify habits temporarily through pressure or fear, but lasting change requires belief that change is possible and meaningful. This belief doesn't appear out of nowhere. It grows through small successes and supportive environments. The most important lesson of the book is not about productivity or discipline. It is about identity. When habits change, identity changes. And when identity changes, behavior follows naturally. You don't stop a habit because you hate yourself. You change a habit because you respect yourself. That shift matters. This book also teaches patience. Habits form slowly, they fade slowly. Relapse is not failure, it is feedback. It shows where awareness dropped or where support was missing. Each return to awareness strengthens the system. Duhigg's work removes shame from change. You are not broken for struggling, you are human. Your brain is doing what it evolved to do. Seek efficiency and reward. The goal is not perfection, it is progress. When you redesign one habit, you gain confidence. When you redesign several, you gain momentum. Over time, life begins to feel less reactive and more intentional. The greatest power in habit change is not control, it is choice. Choice to pause instead of react. Choice to question instead of obey. Choice to redesign instead of repeat. Understanding habits gives you the tools to build a life that supports who you want to become, instead of one that keeps pulling you back into who you were. In the end, the power of habit teaches that lasting change does not come from motivation alone. It comes from systems, belief, and awareness working together. When you change your habits, you don't just change what you do. You change who you are becoming.